How can you tell whether a last name is Irish, English, Scottish or Welsh? What clues hide inside the names we speak every day? And how much of our identity is still shaped by the ancient languages of these islands? Every surname carries a memory, a small fragment of history, passed quietly from one generation to the next. When we look closely, we discover that names are not random. They are maps of the past. They show where families lived, who they followed, and which culture shaped their world. Irish surnames carry the DNA of Gaelic Ireland. Scottish surnames echo the Highland clan system. Welsh surnames reflect patronymic tradition, and English surnames reveal occupation, land, and feudal structure. To understand the difference, we begin with the earliest naming traditions. In Ireland, surnames were among the first in Europe to become hereditary. This began around the 900s, during the era of Gaelic chieftains, and High Kings' families identified themselves by lineage using prefixes like Mac meaning son of and O meaning descendant of. Names such as O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Connor, and O'Sullivan trace back to ruling dynasties. Their names preserve political history just as much as family identity. But not all Irish names contain O or Mac. Many lost these prefixes during English rule, only to revive them centuries later. Names like Byrne, Doyle, Kelly, and Ryan are deeply Irish, and without visible Gaelic markers. Scottish names share similarities with Ireland, but with a distinct cultural structure. The clan system shaped identity for centuries. Families lived under the protection of clan chiefs, and surnames carried this allegiance. Mac and MC dominate Scottish names. MacDonald, Mackenzie, MacLeod, McIntyre. Each name tells a story of land kinship and the Scottish Highlands. Even when the prefix disappeared in records, the roots remained. Grant, Fraser, Campbell, all tied to ancient Gaelic names, often changed under political pressure. In Wales, the naming story is different. For centuries, Wales used patronymics, a system where a child took the father's first name. A man named Rhys might have a son named David. Ap Rhys meaning David, son of Rhys. Over generations, Ap Rhys became Price, Ap Howell became Powell, Ap Owen became Bowen, and Ap Richard became Pritchard. This blending of patronymic prefixes created many of today's Welsh surnames. Jones, Evans, Williams, and Davies all originated from this system, reflecting relationships rather than clan or territory. English surnames grew from a different cultural foundation. After the Norman conquest, society became more structured, record-keeping expanded, and surnames became tied to occupation, location, or physical description. Smith, Baker, Clark, Hill would tailor these names, describe what someone did or where they lived, rather than who they descended from. The English system became hereditary earlier than in Wales, and more consistently than in Scotland or Ireland. This gives English surnames a practical feel, whereas Celtic surnames often feel linguistic, ancestral, or tied to ancient identity. The borders were never closed. People moved, traded, married, and migrated across the British Isles. This is why you will find English surnames in Dublin, Irish surnames in Glasgow, Scottish surnames in Northern Ireland, and Welsh surnames throughout the west of England. The islands shared history, conflict, trade, and cultural exchange, and surnames record this movement. To understand the difference between Irish, English, Scottish, and Welsh names, we study their structure. Irish name reflect lineage. Scottish names reflect clan. Welsh names reflect patronymics. English name reflect occupation and place. Irish names often begin with O or Mac, indicating descent from a particular ancestor. Scottish names often begin with Mac or MC, identifying clan connections. Welsh names often end with S, such as Jones, Evans, Hughes, or shift from AP into blended surnames. English names often linked to professions or landmarks like rivers, hills, fields, and forests, but deeper patterns hide beneath the surface. Irish Gaelic names contain sounds rarely found in English, like the broad DH, the slender GH, and the soft MH, which often become V in English. Spelling names like Slattery, Cavan, or Feeney preserve echoes of Gaelic pronunciation. Scottish Gaelic names have their own phonetic world. MacLeod, MacDonell, Gacaid. English spelling simplified these, but the Gaelic sound remains beneath the letters. Welsh names preserve the unique musicality of the Welsh language. Double L, double D, and W used as a vowel mark the ancient Celtic tongue. Lloyd Llewellyn, Cadwallader Gwyn, all carry the voice of Wales, English surnames, often adapted names from Old English, Norman French and Anglo-Saxon languages, creating a blended naming tradition with roots in feudal life and medieval society timelines. Also help us understand naming identity. Ireland adopted hereditary surnames earliest around the 900s, driven by Gaelic political structure. Scotland stabilised surnames later, often between the 1200s and 1500s, influenced by both Gaelic clans and Norman feudalism. England standardised surnames rapidly after the Norman conquest, creating one of the earliest hereditary surname systems in Europe. Wales shifted. The latest patronymics continued well into the 1600s and even 1700s, creating a distinctive pattern where many people shared a small set of surnames. Naming traditions also reveal ancient stories. The Irish O'Malley clan produced Grace O'Malley, the famous pirate queen. The Scottish MacGregors endured persecution, in many to hide their surname. The Welsh patronymic system linked families through generations of first names, rather than through fixed surnames, and English surnames recorded the rise of medieval towns, trades, and social classes. Each region preserved memory differently. Irish names record myth, poetry, and ancient dynasties. Scottish names preserve clan loyalty, territory, and kinship. Welsh names preserve the sound of their language and the importance of the family line. English name preserve medieval society, occupations, and feudal identity. But each system evolved over time. In Ireland, the British administration sometimes altered Gaelic names, changing Y Donnell, O'Donnell, or Y Seela to Kelly. In Scotland, Gaelic spellings were anglicised. MacDonald became MacDonald, and McCaid became Mackay. In Wales, patronymics blended into English spelling systems, transforming Ap John into Jones and Ap Einion into Bainan. In England, Norman influence introduced surnames like Beaumont, Chamberlain, and Neville, while Norse settlers contributed names like Swanson and Thorson. Despite these changes, distinct patterns still help us identify where names originate. When you see O at the beginning, you are almost always looking at an Irish name. When you see Mac or MC, the name is usually Scottish or Irish, with Scotland the more common source. When you see a name ending in S, it is often Welsh, though southern England adopted this pattern later. When you see a name tied to a job like Baker, Smith, or Cooper, it is usually English. When you see a name beginning with Trapen or Lan, it often signals Cornish or Welsh roots. When you see a name beginning with Fitz, it almost always traces to Norman ancestry. When you see a name formed from a place, a hill, a meadow, a forest, or a village, it is usually English. When you see a name referencing saints, like Gilmartin, Gillespie, or MacBride, it often comes from Scotland or Ireland. These clues guide us, but surnames are never just labels. They are living memories. Behind every name is a human story, a migration, a marriage, a rebellion, a professional landscape, or a language that shaped a family's life. Understanding surnames brings us closer to the people of the past and to the cultures that shaped the modern identities of Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales. Because names are more than words, they are echoes still speaking from centuries ago. And when we listen, we rediscover the ancient worlds that made us. But the story of surnames does not end with the patterns we can see. It continues through the journeys people made and the forces that shaped their identity over centuries. As we move into the later medieval world, migration becomes more visible in the record. Families carried their names across borders, and the old distinctions began to blur. Irish families moved into Scotland as Gallowglass warriors, bringing names like McCabe, McCoy, and McCann into the Highlands, where they merged with Scottish communities. Scottish clans moved into Ulster during the plantation era, creating a landscape where names like Campbell, Hamilton, and Stewart sit beside O'Neill, O'Donnell, and Quinn. Welsh miners travelled to English industrial towns, spreading names like Morgan, Price, and Bowen across the Midlands. Where they blended into new communities, English settlers moved into Wales and Ireland, bringing occupational surnames into Celtic regions, sometimes replacing old patronymics, sometimes mixing with them, sometimes adopting them. This movement is why understanding surnames requires both structure and story. Because a name can carry a clear origin, while its family history tells a different path. A man with the surname Jones may have Irish ancestry. A woman named O'Connor may descend from Scottish settlers in Armagh. A family named Thompson may be Welsh, English, or Scottish depending on the landscape they lived in. The deeper we look, the more we see that surnames are like rivers. They begin in a specific place, but they travel, they branch, they merge. Language continues to guide us. Because even when people moved, their names often preserve the sound of the place they came from. In Irish names, we hear the softness of Gaelic. In names like Keane, Sheehan, or a Hennessy, we hear breathy consonants and ancient clan identities. In Scottish names, we hear ancestral lands. In names like McLaren, Macpherson, or McKinnon, we hear the geography of the Highlands and the history of powerful clans. In Welsh names, we hear the music of Cymraeg. In names like Rhys, Gwyn, and Howell, we hear the rhythm of the language and the continuity of family lines. In English names, we hear medieval life. In names like Fletcher, Turner, and Porter, we hear work, trade, and social structure. But surnames also record survival and the struggle to preserve identity. In Ireland, many Gaelic names were anglicised under colonial rule. Some adopted English spellings, others were changed entirely. Yet beneath these shifts, the original identity often remains traceable. In Scotland, the suppression of Gaelic culture after the Jacobite rebellions changed naming traditions. Some families altered or hid their clan names, others adopted English forms, yet the clan memory endured. In Wales, the pressure to conform to English naming systems slowly ended the patronymic tradition, but the Welsh language preserved the culture, and the old forms still echo in surnames today. In England, the expansion of towns, guilds, and feudal estates shaped surnames, creating names tied to class, craft, and location. Each region's naming struggles reflect its history and the resilience of its people. As we move into the modern era, surnames became more stable, more documented, more essential for identity. But they also became markers of belonging for immigrants, for displaced families, for people seeking connection to a homeland they never visited. In the Celtic world, names became anchors, holding memory during times of change, migration, and cultural transformation. This is why, when someone discovers the meaning of their surname, they often feel something shift inside. A sense of recognition, a thread connecting them to people who lived centuries before. Surnames remind us that identity does not begin with us. It stretches back through time, through ancestors whose names we speak. Even when we do not yet know their stories, but the meaning of surnames today is not only historical, it is also emotional. Names give people a sense of belonging, a feeling that they are part of something older, bigger, and more enduring than any single lifetime. They remind us that identity is layered, that we come from many people, many journeys, many decisions, and many cultures. In a world where people move more than ever, where families blend, and cultures interact, surnames become markers of memory, not boundaries. They help us understand where traditions came from, why families settled where they did, and how the stories of Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales became intertwined. Each name, whether Irish, English, Scottish, or Welsh, holds a piece of this shared history. Names that once marked political divisions now often sit side by side within the same family, reflecting a world where ancestry is mixed and identity is fluid. Yet despite this blending, the old patterns still matter, because they give us insight into how people once understood themselves and how they shaped their communities. When we recognize an Irish O, a Scottish Mac, a Welsh patronymic, or an English occupational root, we are witnessing the echoes of societies that lived before us. We are hearing languages that shaped generations. Gaelic, Cymraeg, Cornish, Old English, Norse, Norman French, all layered into the surnames we use today. We are sensing the landscapes that shaped identity, mountains, coastlines, valleys, islands, farmlands, towns, each leaving its mark on names across the British Isles, and we are remembering the migrations, the hardships, the alliances, the trades, the dreams, and the ordinary lives of the people who carried these names forward. This is why surnames are powerful. They are small pieces of cultural memory, standing quietly in plain sight. When someone learns the story of their surname, they are often learning the story of their people. They are learning who they came from and what shaped the generations before them. But they are also learning that identity is not fixed. It evolves, just as names have evolved. A surname may begin in one language, transform in another, travel across borders, and settle in a place far from its origin. Yet its meaning remains, carried through time. As this journey comes to a close, we return to a simple truth. Surnames are not just records, they are living connections. They hold the voices of ancestors, the memory of lost languages, and the stories that made families who they are today. So when you hear a surname, whether Irish, English, Scottish, or Welsh, pause for a moment. In that single name, there is a history of identity, a path through time, and a reminder that we are all shaped by the people who came before us. And as long as we speak their names, their stories continue,